Yeah, hi folks. Yes, the government is celebrating the opening of its newest woke 5-star prison, which won't work simply because it's comfortable. And prisons should never be comfortable. They should always be places of punishment and nothing else.
Conditions inside were once labelled horrific, so much so that in 2020, prisoners rioted and set it on fire. Now, a new Waikeria prison south of Hamilton, about a 10-minute drive from Te Awamutu, is about to open. It'll house 600 prisoners, with construction now underway on another unit set to hold hundreds more. Simon Mercer had a look at the country's newest corrections facility.
It's cost more than $1 billion and it's nearly ready to go. The new Waikeria will start accepting prisoners in the middle of next year.
What would you like New Zealanders most to know about this new facility?
But it's creating an environment where our staff can do their best work safely to enable people to leave us better and brighter prospects.
In most cases, 2 prisoners will share a cell like this, while the physically disabled will have larger cells.
Natural light's really important in these spaces. This facility would be very much focused on high security prisoners. That's actually one of the gaps we've got in our prison capacity at the moment, particularly in the central part of the North Island.
Also here, sports fields and a meeting house for many cultures.
We have tried to make this environment less intimidating for the people that come in to visit their whānau.
This courtyard lies in a specialist wing for 100 prisoners with mental health needs. Here they'll have a cell to themselves and be offered training programs.
Learning emotion regulation, understanding the impacts of addiction, learning how to break the cycle of addiction.
The new prison's here because the old Waikeria was widely condemned.
This place is horrific. The yards are like animal cages.
A couple of years after Labour said it would build a new prison, prisoners rioted and set the old one on fire.
Still pretty raw for many who've worked here.
Can you give me maybe one good example of something that used to happen that won't happen anymore?
I think large numbers of people in contained yards with officers overseeing them from above in pretty constrained environments. I think you can see here we've created better spaces.
And Waikeria is due to expand even further. Construction will soon start on another unit for 800 more prisoners. The government says that's needed because of its crackdown on crime.
What that means, unfortunately, there's probably will be an uplift in people coming into the correction system because the seriousness of that offending needs to be reflected in the consequences. But the flip side of that is that we're heavily focused on rehabilitation.
No, rehabilitation is not the answer. Punishment is the only answer. Yeah, now prisons should be something like this, or at least like this in some way.
Join us on a gripping journey as we dive into 9 prisons that are worse than death.
There are, I don't know, maybe 500 people in this little tiny room.
Number 9, Gitarama Prison, Rwanda. Deep in Rwanda's heart, a notorious prison festers, its walls echoing with the cries of the damned. Gitarama, now known as Muhanga, has long been a thorn in the side of human rights groups like Amnesty International. Gitarama Prison, a place where humanity is pushed to its limits, is a breeding ground for unspeakable horrors. This foreboding penitentiary is home to the most dangerous of criminals, robbers, rapists, murderers, and violent offenders, all crammed into a space meant for a fraction of their number. With a staggering 6,000 to 7,000 inmates packed into a facility designed for just 600, the result is a nightmare of overcrowding, where prisoners spend their days standing with no respite from the suffocating conditions. The tiny cells, mere meters in size, are devoid of ceilings, leaving inmates exposed to the elements. The results are catastrophic. Every day, 7 to 8 captives perish from the horrible conditions they endure. Some fight violent fights or even turn to cannibalism in order to survive. Having nothing to lose, these desperate individuals will stop at nothing to gain respect or escape, creating a hellish cycle of violence and despair. Without a sewer system, the facility has become a cesspool of filth where inmates are forced to wade through their own waste, battling swarms of mosquitoes that feast on their suffering. The unthinkable reality is that prisoners are compelled to walk barefoot through this toxic landscape, exposing them to the risk of gangrene, a condition that rots flesh and bones due to a lack of blood flow. This merciless environment has turned the prison into a death trap, where the slightest misstep can lead to the decay of limbs, and the slightest infection can become a fatal sentence. In a staggering escalation of horror, 38% of inmates referred to the nearby hospital bear the brutal scars of trauma wounds, including ruptured eardrums and flesh torn by the vicious bites of their fellow prisoners. While 41% suffer from the gruesome consequences of rotting feet, ravaged by the unsanitary conditions that force them to stand barefoot in squalid waters at the crippling cost of amputated toes, feet, and legs, a testament to the prison's unrelenting cruelty. And yet, despite the overwhelming need, Gitarama's medical facilities are woefully inadequate, with a solitary hospital building struggling to cope with the influx of dysentery cases. The hospital's meager capacity is perpetually overwhelmed, with multiple patients crammed onto filthy mattresses, begging for scraps of medical attention from the lone full-time doctor and his team of 8 overworked healthcare workers. As skin infections, wounds, and malnutrition skyrocket, the medical staff are tragically ill-equipped to stem the tide of suffering, leaving the inmates to wish for nothing but death. The conditions here are completely inhumane. It's urgent that they are improved, said Brigitte Troyon of the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is providing medical and other assistance to Rwanda's prisons. 6 people are dying in Gitarama every day. If an epidemic breaks out, there's no knowing how many could die. Repeated pleas from human rights organizations have fallen on deaf ears, as the appalling conditions at Gitarama prison remain stubbornly unchanged, despite fervent protests and condemnations from advocates for human dignity and justice. Number 8. Rikers Island, New York City. In the shadows of the city that never sleeps, a forsaken island lurks, concealed from the bright lights and bustling streets of New York City. This enigmatic landmass, Rikers Island, the city's main jail complex, is a notorious abyss of abuse and neglect, where up to 15,000 prisoners are confined in a culture of fear and violence on its 413 acres. Behind its imposing walls, inmates tremble in terror at the ruthless correctional officers who wield their power with impunity, meting out cruel punishments and ignoring pleas for help. The prison's gruesome reputation is etched in the scars of its victims, who were subjected to merciless beatings, sexual assaults, and neglect. Rikers Island is a ticking time bomb of violence, a powder keg of physical and mental abuse, where the vulnerable are preyed upon and the voices of the oppressed are silenced. This festering sore on the city's conscience has drawn the ire of the press and the judiciary, resulting in damning rulings against the New York City government. Within its cold, unforgiving walls, thousands of criminals awaiting trial, serving sentences, or merely passing through on their way to other facilities are held within this jail. But beware, for this forsaken place has earned a reputation as one of the most depraved and inhumane correctional facilities in the United States, a distinction solidified by its ranking in Mother Jones magazine's 2013 list of the 10 worst prisons in the country. Here, in this bleak and forsaken world, sexual assaults, brutal beatings, and callous neglect are the norm, with officers reveling in the power to inflict pain and suffering on the vulnerable. The mentally ill are particularly preyed upon, and their cries for help are met with mocking laughter and sadistic indifference. The sick and the dying are left to rot, their pleas for medical attention ignored or mocked by the very officers sworn to protect them.
Yeah, you'll notice this guy never mentions the victims.